And welcome to Mets 360 here on Riverside. I'm your host, Brian Jura, and I'm very pleased to be joined tonight by the co creator of the late, great Two Guys Talking Mets, and that's Michael Geis. Michael, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
You're welcome, Brian. Good to talk to you.
All right, well, let's get right into it. Somebody that I believe all Mets fans have been following here recently in his recovery from injury is Ronnie Mauricio. He finally got the call back to the majors last night and was immediately put into the lineup at third base, with the Dodgers having the lefty Clayton Kershaw on the mound. So, how do you think Carlos Mendoza will utilize Mauricio going forward?
I didn't cheat and see if he's in the lineup tonight. I would think that if they brought him up, you've got to play him, 3 out of 5 games at a minimum while he's here. So that's my expectation.
Before the injury to Mark Vientos, I was suggesting that they should call him up, and there was plenty of playing time for three people in two spots, essentially third base and DH. And it would work out to pretty close to that 60% um, thing that you just tossed out, in that they would essentially play 2 out of every 3 days. And I thought that that could work for all three of them. But with Vientos no longer in the picture, I see no reason why they couldn't, both Beatty and Mauricio can't play somewhere close to 90% of the time.
Yeah, and uh, that could work. I'm probably, which we can hit on later on in the show for a different reason, a little more interested in seeing if they could get Marte a little bit more time. I know he plays the outfield, but there's some connectivity with what they do and don't do with McNeil there.
Marte is not my favorite guy on the roster, but there's no denying that here in the last dozen games or so that he's been hitting very well. And I'm a big believer that as long as a guy is in the middle of a hot streak, you might as well give him all the plate appearances you can until the hot streak ends.
That's absolutely true, and then that was interesting. I also felt, not that I had any long term real big hopes for him, but Young sort of came up and looked fine. And sometimes you can get 2 3 weeks out of a guy like that before he turns into DJ Stewart.
I like Young's swing. Even when he didn't hit his first couple of games in the lineup, I was like, that swing will play. And then he delivered some power, which was very nice to see. So
Yeah,
I don't know what his long-term future is, but the Mets currently have three guys on IL. It seems a fairly safe guess that Young will be the first one to go whenever one of those three injured guys returns. But I want to talk about Paul Blackburn. I thought he looked very good in his first outing in 2025 a couple of days ago. It's He's not an exciting guy, but he's very capable. And you don't get style points. The only thing that matters is being able to get outs. He came in because they were playing all of these games in a row, and they wanted the six starter for Senga and Holmes. But there's going to be off days coming up where they won't need a six starter. So now what? Do you keep Blackburn in the rotation, or do you move him to the pen, or is he fungible and someone you could even see them cutting?
I don't know. I don't see them cutting him. I think they'll look at him as an asset, and I think you sort of see how they put the pitching together and what they spent on and what they didn't spend on. And I think it's important to Stearns to have depth in that. It hasn't happened yet, but waiting for further injuries and with guys coming back, it's only a matter of time until somebody that's pitching, that somebody else goes down. And I don't think they'll look at him as someone that they're just going to want to get rid of. So they're going to have to sort of figure it out. I know Mendoza said the bullpen for now. Don't really, I meant to look him up, but I don't think he's really done that much. Interesting to see if he can succeed in that role. McGill always gets thought of that way, but I've come to the conclusion that if he could be a decent reliever, they would have tried it by now. There's something they don't like there. So I don't think that's in the cards either. And so it's a good problem to have, an extra starter. But it's also a little bit of an issue because we saw it last night. You carry an extra starter, now you're one less bullpen arm. They not only they brought up Waddell for Kranick because he had options. Well, they could have even had somebody else up that could have relieved yesterday if they weren't carrying 6 starters. So they're paying a price, for it. He helped one day, and just being on a roster kind of hurt the next day.
Absolutely. It's sometimes it's a case of robbing Peter to pay Paul. But I do think that with the makeup of this starting rotation with both Senga and Holmes, not having just an extensive track record of pitching on a 5 day rotation, I do think that a six man makes sense, or a five and a half, if you will, where a guy comes in and takes a start if they have a bunch of days in a row without an off day, but otherwise is in the bullpen. And then you bring up the point about, can Blackburn do it? And I think as fans, we sometimes look at, oh, anybody can be a reliever, but that's not always the case. And as far as why the Mets haven't done that with McGill, um, to me, McGill tends to have trouble where he's not always locked in right away. And certainly we saw that last night with the
Mhm.
4 runs in the first inning. And you can get away without a lot of stuff in the bullpen. You don't need to worry about facing a lineup 2 or 3 times, but you've got to be ready to pitch. You got to be ready to go from pitch one. And I don't know. As a fan, I wouldn't say that's one of McGill's strengths.
Yeah, I think this isn't a terrible thing. I think he's at the stage of his career where you say, okay, he is what he is, and he's a depth starter, and people get on him because he's only what he is. But you know, they they do win games when he starts. I'm not saying every time, but in other words, the Yankees were throwing out Carlos Carrasco, who was done 3 years ago as a depth starter. So I much rather watch McGill pitch than that, and that's a good team. So he's not unuseful in his current role. It's just you almost hope that, and he has options that in a perfect world, you actually don't need him.
Now, I do think that we need to recognize that McGill came back and did a very good job after that first inning, gave them the depth that they needed. And Carlos Mendoza, recognizing that the bullpen was short and a little overused lately, sent McGill back to the mound, even though he had thrown 93 pitches already after the fifth inning. Do you think that's going to be standard operating procedure now, looking to have starters surpass the 100 pitch boogeyman?
I think it's going to yes and no. All right, I think it's going to depend somewhat on the pitcher. I know I saw people like concerned with how short the outings were in April and May, and I just remember the exact same concerns last year. And it looks like, and this is the second year with Stearns, and Stearns and Mendoza, I guess is the way we'll look at that. And Hefton's been around, but now he's working with a different team of people that they seem to want to ease their starters in. They don't, by August and September, when everybody said Mania will be over certain pitch limits and other guys, Quintana, I remember, they were throwing more innings than I would have ever expected. All of a sudden, it was seven and a third, over and over again. So I think but I do think in this particular case, it's going to depend on the pitcher. I think that they definitely have guys in the rotation. Canning is one. As long as he's in the rotation, McGill is another. Because yesterday was a very special case. The bullpen was incredibly short, where they don't feel comfortable at all with those guys pitching in that third time around the lineup. And I don't think they're wrong. So I think you've seen Peterson start to get stretched out. I think that'll continue. Holmes is an interesting case because on one hand you'd say, oh, you're not going to, he's never been a starter, et cetera. But his stuff plays for trying to get longer outings out of him as long as he can hold up. And there's no reason they always get Senga the extra rest. So I think that needs to be the other side of that equation, that they had to try to push him to give them some innings because you're giving up innings in your bullpen by doing that. So those innings have to come from somewhere. You need to throw, 8 or 9 innings 162 times.
Now, you mentioned that this was the exact same pattern that we saw last year with the starters going deeper as we got deeper into the baseball season. And I'm just curious, if they had re-signed Severino, or Quintana for that matter. And Manaea was healthy. If those guys would have gone longer to start with, because they knew what they had, they were veterans, and they should be able to go deeper given that they were healthy. But this year we had Holmes, who knew what to expect from him, Canning, who knew what to expect from him, Senga coming off missing almost the entire season, Peterson missed a good chunk early on in the year. So there was a lot of unknowns. So hopefully next year we get to find out if Mendoza and the brain trust, both in the dugout and the front office, will allow those pitchers to go deeper earlier.
Right, and you're right about that, that we don't even know there's a similar pattern this year for various reasons. Guys they decided weren't worth bringing back, Manaea not being able to pitch. It's not the same guys, so you're right. We can't. It's a little less obvious whether it's a new pattern or again whether it's they're doing it somewhat out of necessity. I mean, a guy like Holmes, you could see why you'd want to build him up, and that was what we heard about Manaea early last year because he had, he was more of a swing man reliever spot starter the year before the Mets had him.
One of the pitchers that the Mets signed this offseason was Frankie Montas, and he's had, an injury or two throughout his lengthy MLB career, but when he's healthy, he's given you innings. He's given you quantity, if not necessarily quality. But he got hurt. He's on the way back now. He had a rehab assignment in Syracuse. Forget if it was last night or 2 nights ago, but like most Mets pitchers in Syracuse, he didn't do all that great. He gave up 4 home runs. So I want to know from you, what are your thoughts on both Syracuse and Montas?
Well, I was up in Syracuse last year with my old blogging partner Jimmy. We went up to watch a few minor league games in April, and it was a reminder of what I think of Syracuse, which is I wake up every morning and I'm happy I don't live there. So that's my first thought about Syracuse. It's not a great place to pitch. I don't think it's a great place to hit either because the weather is just terrible for a lot, at times. We've seen that, so many Met pitchers in the last couple of years get up there and scuffle. Guys like Sproat and I think Vasel the year before who had been doing very well, through the system until they got there. So that's something to consider. But when it comes to Montes, I have to say that I think the bad news is of everything that got done in the offseason, that was my second least favorite move that Stearns made. I'm not a big fan. And the good news is my least favorite move was the Canning signing. So what do I know?
So you mentioned the trouble that the Mets pitchers doing well in Double-A Binghamton and then struggling when they get to Triple-A Syracuse. And one of the guys you mentioned was Mike Vassell, who was a Rule 5 pick in the offseason, is now on the White Sox. And of course, what does he do? He comes in and I think throws 3 scoreless innings against the Mets. Yeah, the announcer kept talking about, well, he's got the adrenaline pumping, and I'm sure that's to some point, but it's just like, gee, if you had pitched anything like this and Triple-A last year, you'd be a Met. Sometimes it just makes you want to shake your head.
Yeah. I mean, and he landed in, the right Rule 5 place, I would say, in that he's with a team that needs bodies. So a lot of easy opportunity, as I would call it. And he yet didn't land in Colorado, which as a pitcher, I don't think you really ever want to land in Colorado.
Unless you got kids and you want them to go to the school system.
That's good. You're right. That's a notable exception.
I want to switch back and talk about a hitter. And I want to get your opinion on Luis Angel Acuna. And are the Mets doing Acuna, one of their top prospects, 23-year-old, are they doing him a disservice by pigeonholing him into this pinch runner defensive replacement role that he's in right now? I guess my opinion is he needs to get regular at bats to see if he's ever going to be the type of guy who could be a starter on a playoff caliber club. Do you think that the Mets somehow have already defined his MLB ceiling as a utility player?
It's he's one of the guys. First of all, the numbers even better than I do, but I do look at them, and from the time they made the trade, he really didn't do anything special at all in the minors as a hitter. And then when we did go up last April to see Syracuse, for obvious reasons, that was somebody that we were looking at really closely to get eyes on. And the eye test to me was this guy's a utility player. I mean, he can really run and he can really field, and that can be useful, especially during the years where you're cheap. But there's just no, he's a little guy, and there's not a lot of pop in that bat. And I look at it more like maybe, that they've had that need and he's filling that need. And I'm not so sure. He had a full year in AAA last year. I'm not so sure more time's gonna generate much. I felt like this is where he is, and so I'm kind of not down on him because I had lower expectations than some.
It's really interesting to me to hear you say that about him. That you saw him live just last year and were not impressed. I mean, I think everyone talks about the tools, and it's always tough to argue tools with anybody because they can see what they want to see. But my impression has always been, if his name was Luis Angel Flores,
Right.
that no one would consider him a top prospect. It's because of what his older brother has done. And his older brother was not a heralded guy. I believe he signed for 100K when he came up, and then he turned into an MVP. So I think there's a lot of people wish casting here. So I guess I'm somewhat, I don't want to say encouraged, but validated that you saw him and you said utility player.
Yeah, we're pretty aligned, but I'm okay with that too. Like that's not a terrible,
No,
a
no,
cheap
it's not an
utility
insult.
player. And when it comes to bench players, it's always he has some real value. Like he has won games just by pinch running. Like he's that good a runner. And he's made some plays in the field to, I don't know if he's won games so much, but some nice plays at the end of games, maybe they wouldn't have got made. He's helping them win games. That makes him a 23rd, 24th, 25th man. That's not nothing. It's just not what, like, you're right. With his, if he had a different name, when if his name was Guillaume, everybody'd just be happy for what he's doing.
And I do think that people are cognizant of the fact that he's adding value in the role that he's in now. And I don't know. I guess my opinion is that people have built him up so much in their minds that they're greatly exaggerating the value that he brings to the club right here, right now, early June of 2025. I agree with you. He's providing value. It's 25th man on the roster value, but it's value nonetheless. But it's just a case of, if you hold out any hope at all of him being more than 25th man guy on the roster, he's got to hit. And I don't think he's going to learn to hit in the majors. Brett Beatty didn't learn to hit in the majors. They tried in 2023 and 2024, and that didn't work out either. So um, I guess I hold out just a sliver of hope that he's more than a 25th man on the roster. And I think the best place for him right now is Syracuse.
Fair enough.
All right. Well, let's talk about another young guy. This being one of the 2023 baby Mets, and that's Francisco Alvarez. Um, had a great season in 2023, 25 home runs, just one fewer than Johnny Bench did at age 21. Looked like the sky was the limit, but injuries have kind of holding him back the past couple of years, and right now he looks a little lost at the plate. There's even been some chatter about sending him to the minors to work on that approach. Do you think that'd be a smart thing for the Mets to do?
I think that that's worth considering. I wouldn't be. I'm not ready to do it today, but if he doesn't show some power soon, I think you got to see if that power can be unlocked again. Is you wonder what happened. He's this guy hit home runs, and you could live with some of the other things offensively, especially as a catcher, if you're getting the pop. But right now, you're not getting much of anything. This team's trying to win. And then, you mentioned about the disservice and not disservice. He was brought up really young. He didn't get a lot of AAA time or a lot of time in the minors. He hit the majors very young. These pitches, they figure out what's going on. If there's holes, they find them in the major leagues. And sometimes you need to work that out somewhere where, the stakes aren't as high as they are at Citi Field. I would say 2 more weeks, and if he gets something going, great. And if he doesn't, and I think there's also a luxury there in that, he hasn't been. You mentioned Johnny Bench, and Torrens hasn't been Johnny Bench, but you can win games the way Torrens is playing. You can win games with him as a 4 day a week catcher. And then you got another catcher on your 40. I know he's a defense only guy, but maybe you give Alvarez 3 weeks in the minors, and you get the player you really want back.
You bring up a good point in that what I feel the only reason that we can even consider sending Alvarez to the minors is because we've got a very solid number two in Torrens. And, I don't think we'd have this conversation if we still had Nito or McCann or Narvaez as the other catcher on the roster, because we wouldn't want to see them in the lineup four time 4 or 5 times a week. But at least with Torrens, is like, yeah, well, he hits and he's got a great arm too. So
Right.
you don't mind
Exactly.
seeing him.
Exactly. And I mean, that's a game changer. It's the difference. I mean, after, living through Narvaez, who was basically like a pitchback back
Oh
there,
no.
it's like just it's refreshing.
All right. Well, let's look a little bit into the future. Last year at the trade deadline, we saw David Stearns look to improve on the margins, picking up Brazoban and Maton and Stanek. Do you expect him to make more high-level moves this year at the trade deadline? And if so, what position do you think they should be targeting?
I don't think so. I think it's going to be more at the margins. I think that you can see how they really. I think there's a faith in the organization that, between Beatty and Vientos, and I mean, now they brought up Mauricio, that they think they're going to get something, at third and second, they're going to get something going with these internal guys, which I think they really want to get. I don't want to go down too much of the money rabbit hole with you, but I don't think Cohen's looking to run a $20 billion payroll, and I think you want some of these young guys to come through. That's how you do this. Then I look around, and Nemo, they had a contractual obligation to, if he doesn't get hurt. Now an injury could change that whole, but right now when I look, I say, I don't know where. And on the pitching side, they have pitchers coming back. I mean, maybe if a guy, I just don't see him being a guy. He didn't even sniff Burns, his own guy. I don't think he's a guy that believes in going after big money pitchers. And I don't think there's a belief in the organization at this point to go too heavy on rental players. If they're gonna do something big, they'd be looking for guys with a little control. And I'm not so sure. I'm thinking it's gonna be the margins again. You always look for relievers because why not? You never have enough, right? Then who knows? By then there might be injuries where we say, okay, we need a bat here or there, like they did Winker last year. I expect the same type of move.
Now, let me throw a monkey wrench at you.
Okay.
You had mentioned salary and that Cohen, while he is rich, doesn't just want to keep losing hundreds of millions of dollars every year just because he can. But what about the flip side of that? Now, last year there were rumors, didn't come to happen, but there were at least rumors out there that Tariq Skubal was available, and then he stayed in Detroit and won the Cy Young Award.
Right.
This year, again, rumors. I don't know if they're substantiated or not, but there's rumors that Paul Skeens might be available. that the Pirates may look to do like a 5-for-1 type deal where they essentially try to rebuild their team by what they could get back for us. Would you be willing to part with the guys who are currently on the roster plus top of their best 3 or 4 prospects in order to get someone, say, like Skeens?
Me? Probably no. I've just come to the conclusion I just watched the Dodgers win a World Series with, like, no pitchers, no starting pitchers, and I just think that the way the game gets played, I think 2 things. They've expanded the playoffs to a place where you can put the type of rotations together like the Mets are doing and consistently make the playoffs, and I expect them to do that for the 2nd straight year this year that way. Then in the playoffs, is if you have a strong enough bullpen, they run these schedules where 2 days of games, no game, 2 days of game. You can run bullpen games half the time. The Dodgers just did it. So I think the starting pitcher, unfortunately, and it hurts my heart. Tom Seaver is my hero. Is not as valuable as he used to be, and it's somewhat overvalued by fans compared to where they really fit in the game now.
You and I have memories of pitchers pitching three starting pitchers going 3 times in a World Series, and I don't think that's going to happen again anytime soon. And maybe that's why Stearns isn't willing to fork out the 6 or 7 year contract for a pitcher, just because it's really hard to be worth it in the long run.
Right, and the way that these schedules are set up for the playoffs, on the other hand, so you say, okay, right, yeah, what are you going to get? 12, maybe 13 innings if he's an incredible starter in a 7-game series out of a starter, and you can pick up a high leverage, great reliever who can probably throw in the same 7 games 6 or 8 innings. Like, right? And the cost and prospects is night and day.
Mhm.
It's just things change.
Indeed, they have, which brings us to the crazy prediction time segment where things can really change with some outlandish proposals. So we'll start off. I'll give you what I think is a crazy prediction, and then I'll ask you to comment on it. And then we'll flip roles. You give me your crazy prediction, and I'll tell you what I think. Now, last week I put out the crazy prediction, what I thought was a crazy prediction, and it got shot down in a nanosecond. So I hope to do better this time around. So are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right. My crazy prediction is that the Mets win the NL East by at least 5 games. So tell me, is that crazy?
It's crazy. It's optimistic. I like that. No, but I like that. I think, but I don't agree. I don't agree. I don't think it's crazy, but I don't think I agree with it. I think they can win the division. I think the Phillies will be hanging around all year. I think they do have a really good team, and I don't think it'll be 5 games or more. I'd be pleased if it was. So I'm rooting for your prediction.
All right. All right. So show me how it's done. Give me your crazy prediction.
I kind of hinted at it already because the conversation went that way. And it's funny, I came up with my prediction before I read your Wednesday post today. But so now it's very topical to Mets 360. It's about Starling Marte, which is, I think that the role that Marte was in the beginning of the year, the we dust you off when a left-handed starter shows up, is one of the most impossible roles in baseball. And it just, you don't hit enough. Even if you have 4 good at bats, then they say, okay, we'll see you in 5 days. And I think there's something left in the tank. I think if they manage him correctly and it really becomes 3 out of 5 days, not 1 out of 5, but on the other hand, not 5 out of 5, he can have a very big second half.
My preseason prediction for Marte was a good year because I did think that he's always a guy who misses at least a month out of the season anyway. I thought that limiting him to facing lefty pitchers was actually going to be good. It was going to keep him healthy, keep him strong. And, the Mets didn't face a whole lot of lefties early on, but I think that was just a quirk of the schedule. I mean, what is it? Somewhere between a third, 33%, 40% of the pitchers out there are lefties. So there ought to be more opportunities for him than he was getting earlier in the year. Um, I don't think it's going to happen, but I guess I'm kind of like how you viewed my prediction. I could see it. I could see it happening. I don't think it's going to happen, but I could see it happening. But so I'm sorry, I can't say crazy.
If it happens, it probably makes the chances of them winning the East by 5 games greater.
Indeed. So I like to end on a happy note. So we'll close the crazy prediction stuff there. Now
Okay.
we've been mentioning some about the hitters who are on the IL, and one of those is Jose Siri. So what do the Mets do with Siri, who was underwhelming when he was healthy the first dozen or so games of the season that he played? What do they do when he returns?
I don't know. Wonder why they got him in the first place?
I'm right there with you on that one.
I I really like Taylor and feel like he's the type of guy that because of what he does in the field and the way he runs the bases, especially, I mean, he can really play center field, and the right fielder can't play right field, and so that makes sense. And I think that's also what they were thinking with Siri. But Taylor, is a bottom of the order bat. He does just enough where I don't cringe just because he's coming up. And that's all, that's not bad for a guy batting, 8, 9. That's right. And if he gets on, he can run. Siri, I was cringing. He was coming up. So I don't know what they're going to do with him. And, he can really field and he can really run. And maybe that gets back to what you were saying. I mean, you can't carry him for that and carry Acuna for that. And I think that, McNeil doesn't really have it doesn't really have good range at second base, and Beatty certainly doesn't. And guess what? Mauricio, if he ends up sticking, is not known for his glove. We know Vientos can't field. Acuna has value in the field that, as long as you have Taylor, Syria just doesn't have. I don't see the fit for this guy.
One thing that I discussed a lot in the off season was that not every situation or problem needs a home run solution. Sometimes you can just look at something and say, what we've got is okay. If something great comes along and we can upgrade, super. But we don't have to force it. It's almost like Wayne Garrett, you know, just take the okay solution and wait until the home run solution comes, not trying to force, a shortstop to become a third baseman or a drunk to be sober or, all the things that they tried to do in replacing Garrett. And I feel like Taylor is a perfectly fine center field solution. He's got a league average bat and a better than average glove.
Right.
And
And again, in an outfield where, you're committed to a right fielder that is look, and I got no issue with who we're playing in right field, don't misunderstand me. But he's not out there for his glove. So, it's a great fit.
we weren't going to discuss Juan Soto tonight, but just you've brought him up, and I think that people, I don't know, maybe have too much of an expectation for Soto, based on the outrageous salary that he's getting. But I look at him in right field, I don't see a problem. I mean, I think he's perfectly adequate defensively. I think he's made some nice running catches, and I think his arm is very strong. My only concern is maybe sometimes he's not given 100% effort out there. But when he does give the effort, I think the results are fine. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, he's got a good arm, actually better than I thought it would be. I think, I attend a lot of games in person, and uh, I, I really watch the outfielders. It's just very different to watch outfielders, in person. And so that's one of the things I always concentrate on. That's one of the things I like about Taylor is he takes great routes, and Soto's not doesn't take great routes. He just doesn't. So he's got okay speed. He makes up for it sometimes, but he he doesn't. His breaks on the ball isn't great. His angles aren't great. But listen, even if he's a little below adequate, yeah, right? They didn't sign him. Darryl Strawberry was not a great outfielder. Like everybody doesn't. Everybody isn't a great outfielder. Sometimes you're in the lineup for your bat.
All right, well, we got time for one more question here, and going to start it off with a little basketball analogy, if that's all right.
Sure.
We just saw that the Knicks fired Tom Thibodeau, and this coming on the heels of back-to-back 50-win seasons and advancing the team to the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time in a quarter century. It's hard for me to look at their season as anything besides an unqualified success. Yet it wasn't enough for the coach to keep his job. And, I guess my head is still spinning a little bit about that. And I like Carlos Mendoza, and by no means should this be viewed as a way to get him fired. But I am curious, what do you think would be an unqualified success for Mendoza and the Mets here in 2025?
Okay, so we're not talking about what gets him fired, right? We're talking
Right.
about what's a good year.
Exactly.
So real quick, because I'll try to use and I like Thibodeau. He's old school, but I'm going to tell you why I'm not surprised he got fired. If Carlos Mendoza was managing the first game of the National League Championship Series, and the Mets were up 8 in the ninth inning, and he had Waddell in, and Waddell gave up 9 runs, and he never went to the bullpen, and he just sat there. And then they lose the NLCS. No matter what happens before that, you don't usually survive that. So I think that's why Thibodeau's that personally, I couldn't believe what I was watching. He must have been in a catatonic state that night. He didn't even. Anyhow, that's all I'll say about that. And when it comes to Mendoza, I think that you're sort of there. I mean, I'm not a pig. I mean, if they win a division, I mean, they make the playoffs this year. We know we haven't. There's not like long periods of sustained success in the last 20 years. So I think everything. This Stearns Mendoza thing's going very well right now, and I really hope that we don't know 100% ever what's going through Cohen's head. He's still a fairly new owner. And there was so much change. The organization desperately needs stability. I mean, there's just all those GMs in a 5 or 6 year period. That's just not a good thing. So hopefully, I think Stearns is not going to be a guy that's going to be too quick to move on from Mendoza. Mendoza seems very capable in the job, and hopefully everybody in the organization agrees.
All right, so let me throw an example your way. What happens, or how do the fans at least
Mhm.
view it if we have a repeat of 2022, excuse me, where they go out and win 101 games in the regular season and then lose in the first round of the playoff?
I
Is
think
that
the
a successful
fans,
season?
I think that the fans know the FAN board will be people will be yelling and screaming and right. No, it won't be. That's just fans are very win it all. They get spoiled pretty quick these days, is the way I
Yes.
would put it.
Yes, and it's tough because you always have to differentiate between the loud mouths who dominate talk radio and then just the average fan who tries to go to a couple of games each and every year and follows along on TV. They're invested. They're just not obnoxious about it.
Correct.
It's not an easy answer. Now, to me, 2022 is a great year, just because it had been a while since they had won 100 games, and
Sure.
and there's a lot of fun in the regular season. And yeah, September of that year was not as good, in part because Marte wasn't healthy, but still 101 win seasons, yeah, they don't grow on trees. They don't come along every day. And as someone who cherishes the day-to-day aspect of it, and recognizes the playoffs can very much be a crapshoot, I would view a 101 win season as a success.
Oh, yes. The bottom line is, you watch a game every day or close to it, right?
Right.
It's always fun to watch a baseball game. It's more fun when your team wins.
Yes.
So, yeah, if you see 100 wins, it's more fun than if you see 60. So,
Yes.
I
Or
think sometimes that gets lost in this whole quest for, like, people talk about, flags and, I mean, all great. I mean, I'm not opposed to the Mets winning the World Series, but
I'd like to see that happen again in my lifetime.
sure, me too. Me too. But also, like, last year was just a tremendous year.
Yes.
A fantastic year. The way the second half went, the way the playoffs went, like, just they could win 100 games this year and go out in the same NLCS, and in some ways it might not even be as special. I always thought 99 was more fun and more special than 2000, and
Agreed.
2000 is the year
Agreed.
they went to the World Series.
Mhm. Mhm. But that '99 team was just so much fun to root for, and it
That's
it
right.
seemingly, I mean, I know it didn't. I recognize that it didn't, but it seemingly almost came out of nowhere, and it was just filled with such likable players, and
Right.
I don't know, 2000 was fun. I'm not putting
Right.
that down in any way, but 1999 was more fun. It just was.
Yeah, it's just hard to put, you're right. You look through the years and you just know certain years just are special and they're not. I mean, of course, if I'm going to rank them, right, real, it's not hard, right? 69, 86, 1, 2, pick which way. But after that, it gets hard, like, meaning it's not always the team that went maybe one game or two games further. There's just something about certain teams.
Now, to me, I'm always upset that both 2015, the inferior team won, and I just wish that at least one of those had turned out in the Mets' favors, and we could put that up there with the '69 and '86 teams. But alas, not to be.
Yeah, last not to be. And 15, I mean,
They were clearly the better
yeah,
team.
yeah, exactly.
They were clearly the. It still rankles. It still
No, that one's
rankles.
that one's tough. Yeah, that one's, I'll give you one other one, and I don't blame the guy that a lot of people blame, but, 2006, I know they didn't make the Worlds. That team was the best team in
Yes,
baseball.
yes. And then you saw how easily the Cardinals won the World Series that year.
Exactly, and that's what was gonna happen.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
that's
Yeah,
the thing, like,
yeah.
that's the but what are you gonna do?
Eh, all right. Well, any last thing you Mets related you want to get off your chest?
Uh, we hit a lot. I think you did a very good job of hitting all the major topics of the times we live in.
You're very kind, Michael, and I'm very glad that you were able to join us, and I hope we're able to get you back on again here this season.
Thanks for asking.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week. Good night, everyone.